You are now listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc, sharing insights through real, honest, and practical ways to improve your communication and relationships. Featuring your hosts, Dr. Pamela Kreiser, Meredith Edwards Nagel, and Teighlor Polendo.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. What brings us here today is talking about how we believe that good communication is the essence of the health and the strength of our relationships. But sometimes we fall into these things and patterns that make life and relationship harder instead of better. And one of these patterns is what people call tit-for-tat arguing. This is when we match someone's actions or words just to basically prove a point or defend ourselves. It might feel satisfying in the moment, especially if you're a little bit competitive, like the three of us can be.
No way.
But it often turns what should be a smaller disagreement into much bigger conflicts than they need to be. So today we're going to dive into why breaking a cycle like this actually matters, how we can build more trust and connection with people that we want to be in relationships with, and what we can do instead to communicate in a way that actually brings us closer. I don't know about you guys, but a growth curious 2025 mindset I'm having on this one today is basically to be more open, have empathetic communication, and improve relationships that matter to me.
So what does tit-for-tat arguing sound like? Partner A might say,
Okay.
you never help with the dishes. And partner B says, you never take out the trash.
I understood it as there were three different ways of doing this. You can blame shift, you can one-up someone, or you can bring up the past. And so I have an example for each. So blame shifting is somebody says to you, it really hurt when you canceled this plan last minute we had. And then the other person responds, you canceled last month, so I don't see why you're so upset about this. That didn't get you anywhere.
And that is what I think about this whole topic. It is just pumping the brakes or maybe even halting the brakes. And it stops any possible forward movement you might have together.
Yes, totally. I love that image. So there's the blame shifting, one-upping, and bringing up the past. So one-upping example is you never listen when I talk to you. And then the person responds, oh, you think you always listen to me? You interrupt me all the time. You're actually like a worse listener, right?
Yeah. Well,
then,
again, the brakes.
Yeah. And then the third one is bringing up the past. So it's, I feel like you weren't supportive of me during this really tough situation I had. And then the person goes, oh, please, what about last year when I needed you and you weren't there?
Never taking accountability for anything in the midst of an argument.
Yeah. Well, it's a good observation, I think. Yeah, just you're going to shift blame. So, of course, there's no accountability. You're going to one-up somebody by telling them they're worse than you. One-upping would be partial acknowledgement.
I feel like it just blows right past it and it's just distracting. You don't take accountability. And also, here, you're actually worse than me.
Yeah. And then the bringing up the past is just straight up, did not hear you. By the way, remember this thing last year that you were terrible at? Just FYI.
Mm-hmm. And I'm noticing the word you.
Mm-hmm. And never, and you always.
Always, always and never paired with the you. So there is no I. There's you never, or you didn't, or you weren't there for me. Or I might spend money, but you spend more money. Any of those things can be thrown in there. So this is making me think of that research from John Gottman that talked about critical startups. And the critical startup is that early part of a conflict that happens. So some of you might know or recognize Gottman's research. And basically, he's famous for predicting whether the relationship's going to make it or not, using the first minute or so of the interaction. And so those first moments we call a critical startup, and they set the scene of where it's going to go. And Gottman has become so good at the prediction model over the years that their model can predict with 96% accuracy whether the relationship's going to make it or not, based on the first couple of minutes. So I'm thinking these are the first couple of minutes we're talking about here.
It's like the
don't tell me
start of
this.
an argument.
Don't tell me this. This thing I wanted to.
No, it's actually worse, Meredith, because according to his research, it's women that criticize more in marital conflicts, and they have more negative critical startups.
When I heard that he can predict whether or not your relationship was going to make it, I'm like, oh, I'd never be around that person. He'll just tell you you're doomed.
Right. Stay away from Gottman, and then that won't be true.
Yeah. But But that's the whole point of this podcast, right? Is that we believe we can change that. I hope.
I think so. I think there's times when you and I will, in a critical startup moment, we might just blurt something out. That for sure happens. But I do think there are times, more often than we would even want to admit, where we could pump the brakes and say, I'm not going to bring it up yet, or I'm going to think for a second about what I want to say. That's where some of the repair can happen, or some of the lessening of this problem can happen. We probably want to dive a little bit into what's dangerous about it. We know that these negative tit-for-tat arguments have the potential to set us off right away. Just boom.
Yeah.
That's one of the first, I think, downsides, setting off on a negative trajectory, causing a escalatory cycle, making the conflict bigger.
Yeah.
That's one of the first, I think, downsides. You had mentioned also about connection, Meredith?
Yes. One for me that follows that would be just because we mentioned how the three of us can be competitive. Sometimes I think we can lead into this way of arguing as a way of trying to win an argument, which can basically blow up any sort of constructive conversation.
Yeah.
I feel that one for sure.
Mm-hmm. And then,
yeah. Teighlor, what's the saying? When you win?
If you're winning a fight in a marriage, everyone's losing. Because if you made your partner lose, you're a loser too. You do not win to beat your partner. It's a wee game.
Yeah.
One of the things we talked about was how it just puts the brakes on any kind of forward progress. And I think how it does that is it masks what's the actual issue.
Oh, for sure.
So if I say you don't ever empty the dishwasher and you say, well, you don't ever take out the trash, what's our issue? We're almost camouflaging it in a way by saying, you did this, you did this.
You made me realize real conflict avoidance of a real problem by creating a different conflict.
That's true, because maybe I'm overwhelmed and that's the actual problem.
Yeah.
Or maybe I am exhausted and so I really need help, but that would require vulnerability to express that. So instead you come up and say, you never help me. Or you don't do X.
And when we're talking about this, are we talking to both parties? Because it seems like the person initiating is starting it, even though the person comes back with a complaint or whatever. But when you start talking to someone in what I'm assuming is probably an unkind tone, and the hyperbole of you always or you didn't, and whatever the complaint is, it seems like they're setting the tone, and then the person already feels defensive and has to come back with a jab.
Agree with that.
Second person. Okay.
I kind of disagree. I think that you can lead into tit-for-tat arguing easier if someone has a bad tone or someone uses language like you never, you always, or put someone in a place of defense, sure. But like the example of bringing up the past, I didn't feel like you were supportive of me during something is a way of trying to be vulnerable where another person can use that to just go into defense. And what I heard Dr. K saying is sometimes, and what I need to learn is sometimes this way of coming at somebody, what was that again that Gottman calls it?
The critical startup.
The startup, it maybe really what's going on is I'm in a place of overwhelm or exhaustion. And so if I know that, and I know my startup is going to be like this, that's just good to know.
Yeah. What it does is, I think, a bunch of things. It creates that escalatory cycle. Like you said, Teighlor, the tone potentially carries a lot of that meaning in terms of getting us started on that bad path. We talked about how it shifts away from what the actual argument is. I think it also prevents resolution. It stops us from actually going into any kind of problem-solving mode because it's you didn't do this, or you did this. And it takes us away from a constructive path, I think.
Does anyone else keep a laundry list of all the things they've been upset about all month? And then when someone comes at them, there's like, well, so
boy.
I've got all these things that you didn't do. No?
No.
Do that either. I don't do that either.
I think that's your problem. Sounds like a personal problem.
Your problem.
So do you have a friend that does that?
I might know of someone.
You might know someone who does that? Yeah. I mean, potentially that can do that. That's a little bit different than this. This is more tit for tat. That's you do tit for tat with me, and then I go to my scorecard and hit you over the head with it.
I'm just waiting. Like, I'm not going to bring something up, but if they bring something up, oh, I'm ready.
Oh, boy.
That's the competitor in you, which is
Immaturity. Okay. So we've gone over consequences. It stops the problem solving. So we're not even getting to whatever they brought up. We're just deflecting and throwing it back on them.
I think it weakens emotional connection. We've talked in the recent couple of episodes about losing our tenderness for each other.
we have.
Tenderness is not here in tit for tat.
I'm glad you said that.
Tenderness is not here.
I'm mad you said that, but I'm glad you said that. Yeah. But yeah, so can we get into what it does to relationships? So what's the impact on these relationships if you are someone that is receiving this often, or you find yourself getting in this pattern of being this way for some reason?
Sure.
The one that I thought was interesting is that it can cause your partner or friend or sibling to emotionally disengage with you. I think my siblings and I have engaged in this before. I feel like we've wrestled with it pretty well, but I know there's been times where I'm just gonna smile and nod. I don't want to get into this right now again. And then the other one I thought that was interesting of what the impact on this relationship is that it can erode trust.
Yeah.
Because I think if you're anticipating this type of response from someone, this competitive retaliation, right? If I felt that my partner wanted us both to win, I wouldn't always feel like they were trying to fight me directly, fight me. I would want to have closeness and trust with them. But if I felt that I was always anticipating this type of behavior from the other side of the table, I wouldn't really want to lean in and be vulnerable with somebody like that. That's always going to try to fight me, always going to try to one-up me with how much worse I am than them, bring up things, withhold things like grudges and throw them back in my face one day.
Yeah. If you're bracing yourself, you're not creating trust with the other person.
Sure.
And then I would think that eventually that person will never want to bring something up with you. You're not going to grow or move forward, and
yeah, that's true too.
The relationship will be stagnant and ultimately, I think, end.
Yeah. No, it's true. One question that we talked about earlier, is it the fault of the person who starts the interaction, or is it the reaction to the start, or both? And I would say it's the pattern itself.
Yeah.
I don't think it's one thing. I think it's all the things that create that little unit that's a pattern. We go wrong by bringing it up this way. We go wrong by reacting this way, and then staying in this stagnant place.
Okay, so I need some accountability from both parts.
There's some ways to solve it or to de-escalate it. Mary's just going to tell us about that.
Stop the pattern.
I felt like the best one would be the active listening. Do you find yourself genuinely listening to someone when they say something like, I feel like you were not supportive of me, or I don't feel like you're listening to me, saying things that want to bring out the defensive competitor in you? I think the active listening is the pause we talked about earlier even. It helps reduce misunderstanding if you can find yourself honestly listening and not trying to come at with a defense or one-upping the situation. The way to practice this would be to either repeat back what you're hearing, something that shows that you're honestly engaged and trying to understand the other person. Maybe if your pause is that you actually genuinely pause and just take a breath. Maybe it's that you repeat back what you hear, or maybe it's you ask a question. Maybe you can reframe that, or can you say that one more time so I can actually listen, or really listen. It's a hard thing to say, but it's honest.
Let's do some examples of the repair of that kind.
Okay.
Let's say the bad way we would have it is partner A says, you never make time for me anymore. And partner B says, that's funny because every time I try, you're on your phone. Did that strike your chord?
I don't know. It just seems very relatable.
Yeah.
For
Okay.
other people.
Yeah, there's other people out
For
there.
friends of ours.
One strategy, and you're talking about taking responsibility. Instead, so the partner A still says, you never make time for me anymore. But instead of saying, that's funny, you're on your phone, saying, I didn't realize you were feeling that way. Let's plan a time to reconnect. So there's no defense there.
There's a lot of leaning in.
Oh, yeah.
And humbling yourself.
You get home from work. You've both been at work.
Yeah.
Partner says, you forgot to pick up the groceries. Legitimately, we don't have food to make for the dinner tonight.
Yeah.
You didn't pick up the groceries. partner B says, you forgot my birthday last year.
So
It's a forget
it's like a
things.
reflex or something.
Mm-hmm.
So the point is, you want to always take as much responsibility as you can instead of retaliating.
Say that again. You just said you want us to take as much responsibility as we can in conflict.
Yes. Yeah.
Like that was just smooth. That's no challenge. Sorry.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this with defensiveness, that's actually one of the only ways to solve that problem is
I
to
know,
take
you're
responsibility.
right.
So instead, the response is, I'm really sorry. I should have written it down. I can go now. Not that much to fight about after that.
Says who?
I'm like,
Well, what were you going to do? Say, okay, you can't go to the store because I want to stay and fight with you longer?
I think people do that. I recognize this, that when offered solutions, I'll just shut them down because I'm pissed. I'm like,
Yeah.
there is no solution to this problem. It cannot be fixed. Don't even try. I'll just do
Right.
it myself.
Nobody's getting
mentality.
dinner.
Yeah.
No one gets dinner.
But that's where, again, I say I think it's because I'm immature.
Yeah.
To
I
reject
think
real problem solving? I think so.
I am advocating for the fact that the simple solution you had of taking responsibility is not so simple. But
agree
it
with that.
definitely is key to stop having useless disagreements. We're not saying, oh, conflict's inevitable. Have it every day. Try
Yeah.
to be on the same
Yeah.
team with your partner and your friends and your
Sure.
community. And if
Yeah.
you're engaging in useless disagreements that are getting you honestly nowhere, maybe make some adjustments.
I think you can also practice phrasing that does take responsibility. And this could be anybody comes to you and they say, you're not listening to me. One of the best de-escalating things to say is, what am I not hearing? What am I missing? Or if they say, you're not getting the point, what's the point you're making? What am I missing?
I hear empathy.
Responsibility. It's something I use a lot.
Agree.
What am I missing?
That's one of the examples of a strategy in empathy was to say, what do you need from me right now?
So I'm going to make you both crazy right now. Okay.
Okay.
Oh, goodness.
And the
We're gonna
reason I'm going to
see.
make you crazy is you have to practice this.
Okay.
So this is all well and good to talk about it on a podcast. We put it on YouTube. That's all great. We have to practice. So you need to start with the kids, because I always say it's easier to start with the kids because they're less critical, and ask kids, what do you need from me right now? And as soon as we start making that part of our vocabulary, I think we can start putting some, I don't know, natural behind those messages, as opposed to having them sound canned or odd in a combative relationship where we never had nice things to say.
Yeah.
Okay. Start on the kids.
I had a story for you. I had a moment watching my kid having an interaction with a friend that was upset. And I went, am I maybe doing something right by her?
Love it.
So her friend was really upset that the hangout was ending. She was crying. And my daughter paused and she looked at me and she goes, I need to check on her. And I was like, okay, do you want to check on her before we go? That's okay. And she went back to go check on her and she looked at her. And I said, do you want to ask her something? She goes, you need a count or a song feel better? And the friend was like, a song? And she sang her this Fred Rogers song about how grown-ups come back when they leave somewhere. And then she told her, see, I will come back and we will play again. And the friend stopped crying a little bit. And then she looked at her and she goes, and sometimes I get sad too.
Nice.
I
Very
was just like,
cute.
I was like, did I just watch her check in with a person that was upset, ask them for maybe what they might need, and then have some empathy? I love it. It's like the sweetest. It was just a little win.
That's awesome.
Definite win.
Oh, yeah. And then
I
she
like
screamed
that.
in my face during dinner time.
Those little moments. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else do we do?
I thought actually that Dr. K, you would like the timeouts and cool downs from this, which Gottman has talked about as a strategy for other things. To commit to coming back, right? Gottman's idea, which is actually just remove yourself from the conflict, go do something different, actually calm down and make a plan to come back together where it can be constructive.
Because the reflecting often turns into ruminating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have the negative interaction, and it's not a break to go in the other room and think about how right you are and how wrong they are.
Yeah.
not a strategy there.
Teighlor, did you have one that you might find handy when you're gathering your things for the month to fight back?
I find in most things like this, staying curious that we've talked about, I really try to slow down. I really try to hold my tongue and then staying curious. I like how you have tenderness. You're saying have tenderness for your partner. And then I really want to learn empathy a little bit more. I think that's my goal. I do feel like it is an area I can improve in always.
Stay curious. What do you mean by that?
I think when we did the neutral questions episode, I don't excel in that area. I tend to come in assuming I know some things maybe, and my questions might reflect that thought. I think to genuinely stay curious and not talk as if I know the answer. And I think that tandems really well with tenderness, is that you would want to be tender and curious and go from a place of not knowing why they felt some way or why they're asking this of you. And then, of course, always for me, it's going to come back to identity. So whatever someone brings something up with me, to reject the idea that, oh, you're right, I'm a bad person, or I'm a bad mom, or I'm a bad wife. Reject the identity pieces that I start to layer on and just tackle the problem at hand. It's okay. My partner said I hurt him. Okay. I need to own up to that. Apologize for it. I think I need to do that. And then
take responsibility.
Yeah. It always comes back to that, which is hard. It is hard to do, Mare. It's not my favorite thing.
You know what I was thinking when you were talking? It reminded me of Mark Brackett in that book, Permission to Feel. And remember that Brackett says we should be emotional scientists, not emotional judgers.
Yeah.
When you're talking about curiosity, it just reminded me of that when you were explaining. And that's being curious about what's going on rather than saying, this is good, this is bad, this is wrong, this is right.
Yeah. And I would say that's not always easy to do, but we're trying to improve. We're trying to make progress. We're trying to change patterns, or especially if you were given examples growing up. I don't want that for myself. I want something different. I feel like these little moments of stopping these types of exchanges with your partner can really change your whole relationship dynamic. Sometimes it's not these big arguments, big life-changing conversations. I feel like it's the small day-to-day that tend to impact how things are going to look in 20 years.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I'm curious, Dr. K, in successful marriage relationships, did you find when you were going through different seasons or younger, did you lean into this type of arguing ever? And how did you fight it if you did?
We've been married 35 years, plus 35. Thank you. I guess I would say that you can get more into the tit-for-tat sequencing when you have deficits. That came about sometimes when you're sleep deprived.
Okay.
Or you had less money.
Yeah.
Or you had less energy.
Yeah.
And it's a little easier to go there when there's a deficit of some kind. So now, after our kids are out of the house and they're grown, we don't have as many deficit moments. And I don't know that we have as many tit-for-tat arguments because we aren't depleted going into it. I think in those moments where we're depleted or we're facing some struggle, that might be where we need to take responsibility.
I'm hearing when you're in that deficit or when you're overwhelmed or you're exhausted or, like you said, depleted, it might be easier to get into these ways. I'm hearing a little bit of, okay, Meredith, don't beat yourself up so terribly, but also pause and try to take responsibility so that you don't create patterns of being like this. And then you blink and you're out of that deficit period. You're out of the period of scarcity or financial struggle or sleep or whatever it might be. And then it's just a way that you are with your partner, which I think can go into conversations we've had before this podcast, like bickering.
Sure. I think the other thing is just see the deficit when it comes and say, we're going to be more prone here. Be careful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody's tired. We thought we were going to get at the hotel at 10 and now we're here at 1 a.m.
Yeah.
That's just be careful. You've just set the table for potentially this tit-for-tat argument because we're both tired.
Yeah.
I hear the term unmet needs a lot right now. And I feel like that's what I'm hearing is unmet needs.
So then part of what we're saying then is the solution is to maybe even be more proactive about it and check in and see what unmet needs are out there maybe take the temperature when things are starting to fall apart and
Mhm.
say, I'm going to be more prone potentially to this sort of speech. I need to be careful about it, including reacting, not just starting it, but reacting. My partner might say something that's going to set me off. Be careful about being set off, and then approach it by taking responsibility.
Yeah.
Once again, thank you for joining us today. Please remember to rate, share, and subscribe to our podcast. And thank you for listening to Asking for a Friend.
Let us know what you thought of the episode. Our email is hello@afafpodcast.com. This show is for educational purposes only and is copyrighted. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. Thanks for listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc.